Hey, it's Mark Moseley Show. Welcome. And today, something a little bit different. First of all, let me tell you why it's a little bit different. I started a new business venture in the last couple of weeks, and I'm also in a play. And those two things combined have made my life so incredibly busy over the last couple of weeks that I have not been able to put the work into a regular podcast that I always do. I spent a lot of time researching, writing, as you know, recording and producing and voicing comedy sketches for my podcasts. And over the last couple of weeks, I simply haven't had that kind of time. So what I thought I'd do today, because I wanted to get something out before the end of this week, before another week goes by, I wanted to talk about some of my experiences in show business. And those of you who know me well probably know some of these stories, but for the average person, they find this kind of stuff kind of cool. I've been in show business starting at the age of about 15 years old. I started working, doing radio, and worked my way up the ladder, as one does, bouncing from city to city when you're a young man, and looking for better and better jobs, and eventually found my way to Miami, where I landed at the legendary Power 96. I was there for the beginning of that, so helped make it legendary, had a hand in it. And I did the mornings there for about 18 years. My life took a dramatic turn in 97, I believe it was, somewhere in there, 97. I do impression of Eddie Murphy, one of the many impressions that I did on the radio. As a matter of fact, I had a lot of experiences. Everybody's seen the guy on Instagram, TikTok, who he interviews celebrities on the red carpet and he does an impression of them to their face. Well, I was doing that all the way back in the day at Power 96. A couple that come to mind, Gilbert Gottfried came in one time because he was doing some stand-up in Miami. And he came in on the morning show, and we had him as a guest. And I started doing my Gilbert Gottfried impression for him. And he looked at me and he goes, "Why did I get out of bed and come do this? You've got this guy here. You don't need me. I should go back to my hotel room and go back to sleep." That was fun. I also did Cheech Marin for Tommy Chong. So we had Tommy Chong on the show one time, and I started doing my Cheech Marin impression for him, you know? And so we had a lot of fun with that. I wish I had tapes of these shows, but I don't. You know, you do morning radio every day for 18 years. You're just not going to have all those shows. But I have the memories. What happened on the morning show, I used to do my Eddie Murphy impression a lot. I had a lot of impressions that I did regularly, a lot of characters that I'd created. And those of you who listened to that show back in the day know about some of the characters that I did. Many of whom have become extremely politically incorrect, just because it's all about DEI now. And hold on to that thought, because by the end of this story, by the end of this hour, I'm going to come full circle on that concept. So what happened in around 97? I was doing my Eddie Murphy impression on the radio. Unbeknownst to me, 3 things were happening that would change the course of my life. Number one, Disney was producing full-length feature films out of their Orlando Disney World production facility that they had built there. So they were making Mulan. Mulan was one of the films that was made out of Florida. I think the other 2 were Lilo and Stitch, if I'm not mistaken, and The Emperor's New Groove, which an all-time favorite Disney film. You know, just the voice talent on that movie, incredible. And the style. By the way, I got a tour of some of the, you know, when you go and you start working for Disney, you get to go backstage and you get to see them producing. And I remember seeing, because Emperor's New Groove was in production. So when I was touring the animation building, they were showing me, I was seeing all these boards and stuff like that with all the pictures. And the film was originally called Empire of the Sun, and it was actually much more of a serious film. But as happens in animation, sometimes everything gets thrown away and they pretty much start over from scratch. And you'll hear another story about starting over from scratch coming up a little bit later. So the second thing that happened was, the first thing that happened was they're making Mulan in Florida. The second thing that happens is someone hears me on the radio in Miami doing my Eddie Murphy impression. And the third thing that happens is Eddie Murphy decides that he needs to take a vacation with his family during a time when Disney was hoping to get him in the studio to record some tracks for the film because they were on a production schedule. They wanted to get a rough cut of the movie to where they could send it to the executives back in California. And so, unfortunately, they did not have access to Eddie Murphy for a while. And that's where I come in. So one Monday morning, I get a phone call from the radio station, and they say, hey, someone from Disney is looking for you. And I remember at the time I joked because we used to go to Disney World all the time. Living in Miami, it's a 3.5 hour drive. So we used to go to Disney World all the time, being big Disney fans. Walt Disney was my idol when I was growing up, which is why being involved with anything that had his name on it was my dream come true. Anyway, we had just come back from Disney World, so I get this phone call, and they say, oh, someone from Disney is looking for you. And I joke to my wife, they probably want their towels back from the hotel room. But it turned out that it was this phone call that they said, hi, Mark, someone from our production team heard you on the radio, and we'd like to fly you up to Orlando to do some tracks, some recordings for us. Now, these are what are called scratch tracks. Scratch just means it's a temporary thing, and the actual actor is going to come back in and record it, and they're not going to actually use what you're recording. It's a placeholder. So I was, of course, blown away and just, like, thrilled. So I'm like, yeah. So I get on a plane. I go up to Orlando. And one of the things that is really interesting about the production facility there in Orlando is that the recording studio is part of the backlot tour. So when you're at Disney World and you're at Disney MGM Studios there in Florida, there's a area where you're on a walking tour. So you're walking through production facilities, and you're kind of on street level, but then there's windows, and you look down into what is a recording studio. So if you're in that recording studio, you're part of the tour because people are walking by constantly and looking down in there. And, oh, who's that? Of course, I'm a nobody, but sometimes, you'd see for sure celebrity recording stuff in that studio. Anyway, I get to the studio, and of course, I'm the wrong color. I'm not black. And it was funny. It was amusing because these people, they see me, and then they bring me into the studio, and then they all go on the other side of the glass into the other part of the facility there where the mixing board is. And so I'm out there in the studio by myself, and they're all on the other side of the glass having this conference. And I know exactly what's happening there. Is this the right guy? Who did we fly up here? What's going on? He's white, And so I started doing the voice for them because I figured they had the mic open, right? So I just start ad-libbing as Eddie Murphy, and I'm standing in this studio going, this is beautiful. I love this. This is a very nice studio. It's huge. Oh, and look, I'm part of the tour. Look, hi, people. What's going on? And then I look, and there's this like sigh of relief that I can see, even though I can't hear it. There's like this visual sigh of relief collectively among them. So they're like, okay, he's white, but we got the right guy. So I do the scratch session, and I'm like, okay, well, that's that. But as I'm leaving, I start to realize some things that are possible. And what I start to think on is the fact that Disney is hiring A-list actors to be in their films. Now, those A-list actors are perfectly happy to take, a couple of $1 million to do the movie. But what they don't fool with, generally, is the merchandising and the video games and the commercial tie-ins and all of that. And so I knew at this point, because going back, if you go back a few years, Robin Williams was really the first, think about it, A-list actor that Disney hired when he played the genie. Well, Robin Williams wasn't available for anything but the movie, so they went out and they got Dan Castellaneta from The Simpsons, and he did the all of the other genie stuff. Whenever they needed the genie, they would go get Dan Castellaneta from The Simpsons, and he would do the Robin Williams thing. Yes, I don't do a good Robin Williams impression. It's very bad. But so these A-list actors don't show up for this kind of stuff because to them it's chump change. Now they can hire me for $1,500 for 3 hours, and they're perfectly fine doing that. But, to have Eddie Murphy come in there, it's going to cost them $50,000 for the day. So I thought to myself in the moment, I was like, oh, wow, well, you know what? This could actually wind up being more of a long-term thing. There may be more work down the road because A-list actors don't show up. The exception, by the way, being Larry the Cable Guy. Some years back, I was at Disney and I was recording something, and I know the guy that's he was the VP of character voices, is the division of Disney that deals with all the character voices. And I knew him, and I knew I could show off for him, and he knew I did other impressions and stuff like that. Well, I do a really good Larry the Cable Guy, and I know that's a high-demand character because Mater from Cars is a beloved Disney character. So I start doing my Larry the Cable Guy while I'm there in the studio recording some other stuff, and his face lit up. And he said, that's a really good Larry the Cable Guy impression. He goes, unfortunately for you, Larry makes himself available for everything that we need. He's the nicest guy in the world. Darn, because you want that work and you're hoping that you'll get, I auditioned at one point, Ernie Sabello, who is the voice of Pumbaa from The Lion King. They had to find somebody to stand in for him because I think he had some health issues or something like that. So at one point I remember I was auditioning to be the new voice of Pumbaa. And let me see if I can recall it. How does it go? I can't grab it right now. I tell you what, let me do this. Let me take a break. I'll come right back and maybe I'll find my Ernie Sabello voice. Right back on Mark Moseley Show.
It's Mark Moseley Show. Follow Mark on X, Instagram, and Facebook at Mark Moseley. And subscribe for new episodes weekly on your favorite podcast platform.
So Pumbaa from The Lion King is somewhere in here. And I found it while I was on the break.
Sometimes you just can't call them up right away. But I was auditioning for Pumbaa for The Lion King when I started doing my Larry the Cable Guy impression. Today on the show, I'm taking a break from politics, although there will be some politics to come later in the story. But for now, it's pretty apolitical. Sadly, it gets political towards the end. But anyway, so I did scratch for Mulan, and then they kept bringing me back to do more scratch, and they knew they could get me to do different things. Next thing you know, I was doing voiceovers for Toys That Talk, and they flew me to Los Angeles in late 99, early 2000 to record the Mulan Story Studio, which was an old CD-ROM video game So I did a bunch of stuff for that, and I did a whole bunch of tie-ins, TV commercials and things like that. And then I actually wound up with a line in the movie. Even though Eddie Murphy replaced everything that I did, there was one line in one of the songs, and it was the song "I'll Make a Man Out of You," sung by Donny Osmond. And they couldn't get Eddie Murphy for that song, so they brought me in. And so in the song, there's one line from Mushu who goes, "This guy's got him scared to death." And so that got me into the film, which was kind of cool because because I had one line in the movie, I get invited to the premiere. I'll never forget, my wife and I, we went and we sat there, and then the credits rolled. And of course, everybody in the theater there for the screening is in the movie or a part of the movie. So everyone's sitting through the credits. And then it came to additional voices, and mine was near the end, but it was there. And I was like, that's my first screen credit. And then what happened is really amazing because sometimes in show business, one door opens another, and then others get opened. And I was still working, doing morning radio in Miami at this time. This was late 90s, early 2000s. I was continuing to do the radio show. In fact, I got a job offer to go do morning radio at KTU in New York, which I passed on. But that's another story for another day. I had family in New York too, so it was a really, really big deal for me to pass on that job offer because they had tried on 3 different occasions to hire me for their morning radio show in New York. And of course, you're not supposed to turn down an offer to go work in the #1 radio market in the country. But I did, and it was funny because it came down to money. What they were offering me was about what I was making in Miami, plus 10% state income tax, plus a higher cost of living. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to stay. And when I went back to Miami, when I get back, the boss calls me into his office and says, "I heard you got an offer to go to New York. I'll give you a raise to stay," which I was going to stay anyway, but the raise really sealed the deal. Anyway, so I'm still working in Miami, but I'm flying back and forth to LA a lot. So here's what happens next. Eddie Murphy finds out about me. Now, I've never met the man. People always ask me that. "Oh, have you ever met him?" I've never met him. And of course, the joke for the longest time has been, well, if I'm there, he doesn't have to be. I did meet one of his sons, Miles Murphy, once at a friend of mine's house in Los Angeles, and it was the weirdest thing because my friend, a gentleman by the name of Mohammed Moretta, who's a DJ and a record producer and an entrepreneur, and he had this house in the hills in Hollywood, and I just was hanging out, and so was Miles Murphy and a friend of his, and so and that was it. It was like 4 of us, and so I'm doing the voice for Miles, and he's like, "I'm going to tell my dad about you, that I met you," and so that was kind of cool. That's the closest I've come to meeting Eddie Murphy. In fact, over the years, I've had close calls. I remember there's one studio in Los Angeles, LA Studios. It's right on Coengo Boulevard. Very famous, and a lot of stuff gets done there. And if you ever have the opportunity to be in that studio, you're going to see a lot of celebrities. I saw Will Ferrell there. I met Stephen Root there. I met Katie Seagal there. I mean, you'd see everybody goes there to record. And I met Patrick Warburton there. Quick side story about Patrick Warburton. We're literally, you're sitting in the lobby with really famous people, and you're just like, you're just the journeyman actor there, just there to do a day rate job. But if you're there, it's like you're legit. So these people will talk to you. So I'm sitting next to Patrick Warburton in the lobby, both of us waiting to go in and record our respective things. And I strike up a conversation with him, and he's a nice fellow. And then I tell him, I say, I do an impression of you. And I said, I'm waiting for you to get so famous and so big that you don't have time to do anything, and I'll get a chance to do some sound-alike work for you, because I told him I do sound-alike work. And he goes, well, let's hear the impression. So I did it for him, and he, in his inimitable fashion, he just deadpans. He goes, yeah, that's not bad. And so fast forward a few years later, I wound up doing some sound-alike work for Patrick Warburton, sure enough, for something that he was too busy to do. And that was Mr. Peabody and Sherman, the animated series that they made for Netflix. I did 3 episodes of that and played the character that Patrick Warburton played in the movie. It was Agamemnon. So I was the voice of Agamemnon in the animated series. And got to work with some really amazing actors. I was in a session once with David Koechner, and everybody knows David Koechner. Now, he's a guy that you know him, but you may not know that that's his name. But so he's the guy on The Office that played Todd Packer. He's the guy in the Anchorman movies that played Champ, the sports guy. That's David Koechner, for those of you to put the name with the face. And he is a riot. I couldn't stop. I blew so many takes because I couldn't stop laughing at his brilliant comedy skills. So anyway, let me go back to the timeline because I'm bouncing all around here. So what happens is Eddie Murphy becomes aware that he's got a pretty good sound double out there. And he starts sending the studios to me. And he starts having this wonderful, for me, attitude of, well, I'll just have that guy do it. So there's a thing in filmmaking. Well, it's 2 components. There's a thing in filmmaking called looping, and there's another thing called ADR. Now, what ADR is, additional dialogue recording, is what it stands for. And let's say you're in a movie. And you're 2 actors, they're in a car, and it's a convertible, and they're driving down the highway, and they're recording they're obviously talking, and they're recording that dialogue, but that sound is not going to be clean because you've got the background noise and the wind noise caused by the car moving down the road. So what they do is they bring the actors back into a studio, into a sound stage, they put the scene up on the screen, and you match what you said, you match your lip movements, and you re-record that dialogue. That's called ADR. There's another thing called looping, and what looping is when you have a film that is going to eventually wind up going to airline use and then eventually regular television. So in airlines and regular TV, you don't want any swearing. In fact, you don't want anything that's R-rated. So they not only have to change words that are profanity, they have to change entire jokes sometimes if the joke is just way too dirty and they're trying to squeeze it into the movie. Sometimes they just cut it. They'll cut that scene. But if they can squeeze it in, if they can figure out a way to reword it. So I wound up doing Eddie Murphy's looping and ADR. Now, the thing about looping is you get a day rate and you get your pay and you walk away. But ADR gets you in the film. So it gets you in the film, which means you're then on the DVD, which means you're going to get on the residual train. So you're going to be making money. And sometimes it's pretty good. You're going to be making money for years to come. So I did movies like Life, Daddy Daycare. So when you're watching Daddy Daycare, there are moments in the movie where Eddie Murphy is talking, but it's my voice coming out of the screen. I remember in Daddy Daycare, there's a scene where the kid goes into the bathroom and literally gets poop all over the walls, and Eddie comes in and he's looking around, and I remember I had to do something with that scene. So when you watch that scene in the movie, there's some of me in there. And I did ADR for a lot of Eddie Murphy's movies, starting in around 99, 2000, and continuing on for a couple of decades. So I did Life. I did the Nutty Professor movies. I did all the characters in Norbit. So here's the challenge, because Eddie Murphy creates characters, and then you have to do Eddie Murphy doing a voice. And so that was the first big challenge that I had was Nutty Professor, because Universal calls and they're like, Eddie Murphy's office sent you to us. We want to know if you can match Eddie Murphy doing characters. And I said, yeah, I think I can. So they bring me in, and I'm doing stuff like Hercules, 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 and I'll toss this knife in the crack of your behind, and
I'm going to cleanse my colon right now.
I had to do Eddie Murphy doing characters. So you're doing an impression of Eddie Murphy. So you're going along, you're doing an impression of Eddie Murphy, and then Eddie Murphy starts doing this character, and he's doing the father from the Clumps. And so that's a real challenge. I did a lot of stuff like that. Meanwhile, I'm doing stuff for Mulan, continuing to do stuff for Mulan, because they're still rolling out merchandising and toys and games and TV commercials. And then Shrek comes along. And I'll tell you the story of Shrek when I come back. Stick around. It's a special edition of the Mark Moseley Show podcast.
It's Mark Moseley Show.
I'm Mark Moseley. Welcome back to Mark Moseley Show podcast. I've been super busy the last couple of weeks, and so I decided I would give you guys what they call in the business an evergreen episode of my podcast. So very little politics in this one, although there will be some politics. So if you're a political junkie, stick around, because we are going to get political a little bit later on, as the story takes a dark and tragic turn. So anyway, so then Shrek comes along. And of course, Eddie Murphy is Donkey in Shrek. And now I'm getting calls from DreamWorks. And DreamWorks wants me to come in and do some stuff. And of course, what do I hear on the phone? Eddie Murphy's office sent us to you. You're his sound double. And, So in Shrek, what I wound up doing for Shrek was at the end of the movie is officially over. And then there's an extra ending. And everybody knows this that's ever seen Shrek. It's the Shrek in the Swamp karaoke dance party. Well, Eddie Murphy was not available that day to do that. And so I went in and I did all the singing for Eddie Murphy for the Shrek in the Swamp karaoke dance party. So when you hear, I like big butts and I cannot lie, that was me. But yeah, I did that. And what was cool about that day was, number one, they recorded it all at Hans Zimmer's studio, which is stunning. So gorgeous. I mean, you just walk in there and you're like, this dude has made money, because it was the decor, the way that the walls were done for sound dampening. I've been in a lot of recording studios, and this one blew me away. That was the first thing about that day that was amazing. The second thing that was about that day that was amazing was I'm coming in on the tail end of John Lithgow, who had just finished his recording. So he's getting ready to leave. And I come in. I'm the next actor up. And they introduce me. And they say, this is Mark Moseley. He's going to be performing for Eddie Murphy. And Lithgow goes,
Really? Well, I have to see this.
So he sticks around and watches me do my session, which, he should have been way too busy to have done. And he comes up to me at the end and he goes,
You, my friend, have chutzpah.
I will never forget that. That was a great day. That was a great day.
I have to see this.
And he stuck around. So then the next thing that happens is Eddie Murphy does a TV show, an animated series. It was the claymation animated series, The PJs, which was an animated series for Fox. If you're not familiar with it, go look it up. It ran for like 3 seasons, maybe 4. It was very cutting edge, very edgy, very edgy. This was like I don't know if Family Guy was on the air yet, but it was as edgy as Family Guy is. So it was, in fact, you could say it's the Black Family Guy, if you want to get like down to it. It was about a supervisor who was a supervisor for a building in the ghetto. So he lives there with his wife, and there's all these characters, including like a crack addict was one of the main characters. Just all these weird people, but it was really wonderful. And I worked with some great people on that, and some fantastic actors. And so what would happen was Fox would fly me to LA every week during the production schedule, during the time that they were recording. So here's what would happen with the PJs. Eddie Murphy would come in, and he would do one session for each episode. He would come in and he'd record everything, and then because they would always tinker with stuff, they would change things. Like they'd change a line here, and they go, "Oh, this line doesn't work. Can we punch this line up?" So they would change the line. So they would literally fly me from Miami, first class, very nice hotel, rental car, per diem for food, the whole nine. And it was the first time in my life I'd ever flown first class. And can I tell you something? If you fly first class and you have to go back to coach, in fact, I don't fly first class generally. But during this time in my life, I was living the life because I was flying first class to LA, staying right in the heart of Hollywood at the Hilton, and right there at Universal Studios, and going and doing these recording sessions and having a blast doing, again, it was a very similar, the character of Thurgood Stubbs, that was his name, the character on the show. The character of Thurgood Stubbs was basically the same character of the father from The Nutty Professor. So it was this thing here. And I would fly to, and I did this for like 2 years. Well, now come 2002, something happened in Miami, and after 18 years on the air there, they let the morning show go. So I was out of that gig, which I had done for a very long time, and which paid very well. My boss, Greg Reed, was a very generous man, very generous with the company's money. And I have nothing but great things to say about him and about that radio station, because we did some amazing things. We built something really special, and we had a blast for all those years. He got it. He understood that to have really good people, you paid well. And of course, this is before consolidation. You know, I hate the Telecommunications Act of, I think it was 1996, because that was supposed to, quick side note here. The Telecommunications Act of 1996, if I'm not mistaken, Clinton era, was designed to encourage minority ownership of radio and television stations in markets across the country. It was supposed to level the playing field so that minorities could own and service minority communities. Well, like many things that the government does, here he goes getting political, like many things that the government does, it had the exact opposite effect. And that's what led to basically the destruction of the radio business and consolidation, which just eventually, here we are 20-something years later, and everything is owned by 3 companies. The biggest being iHeart, which at the time was called Clear Channel. And so they basically destroyed the radio business. But before that, boy, those were the good old days. The 90s, you could make good money and have a lot of fun. And so I did. I was very sad to have that job come to an end, although it didn't actually come to an end. I moved to Los Angeles because here was the opening. This was the chance for me to go ahead and move my family to LA. My wife kicking and screaming. She was leaving family behind because all of her family were down there in South Florida. My family was in Mississippi. So it wasn't as hard for me to leave Florida as it was for her. But it was also very exciting because I was traveling back and forth to LA a lot. And sure enough, I get to Los Angeles and I'm here for about a year, I think, maybe even less. And I get a phone call from Greg at Power 96. And he's like, hey, I want to hire you back. And I'm like, well, I'm here in LA. And he goes, well, you can do the show remotely. And so I did that, and using what's called ISDN. This is before super high speed internet that gives you a streaming quality. We used to have to use a device called an ISDN unit. And basically what ISDN is you make 2 telephone calls. And a telephone call, if you don't know, is 56 kbps, 56 kilobytes per second. And if you make 2 telephone calls, you get 128 kilobytes per second transmission rate, which makes a telephone call into CD quality. So you can broadcast over this unit. It's called an ISDN unit. It's a box, and you literally dial 2 telephone numbers. And once they both connect, you have a stream that sounds like the person is in the room with you. Anyway, so I moved to LA. And then Mulan 2 happens, and Shrek 2 happens. Mulan 2, I was asked to do that movie because they first offered it to Eddie Murphy, but Eddie Murphy knew it wasn't going to theaters, it was going to DVD, and so the money wasn't that great for him. It was great for me, but it wasn't Eddie Murphy money. And so simultaneous to that, though, he was getting $1 million to do Shrek 2 because the original Shrek had been a global box office smash. So everybody got a bump in their salary. So I'm working on Mulan 2, and I remember we flew to New York for a week to record there. And it's interesting because I was talking earlier about how sometimes they throw the entire thing away and start over. So the Mulan 2 that I went to New York and recorded was not the movie that came out in 2005. It was originally Kevin Bacon was the bad guy, and it was a completely different storyline. And they had done all this work on it, and they decided, we don't like it. We're going to reboot the movie, start over. So I got to do Mulan 2 twice, once in New York and once in LA. And ultimately, Mushu, for lack of a bad guy, Mushu is kind of the bad guy in Mulan 2, because he's trying to break Mulan and Shang up, you know. So I did Mulan 2, and then at that same time, I was working on Shrek 2. And on Shrek 2, they would call me in, and I would go in and do, again, scratch tracks for Eddie Murphy for Shrek 2. And I probably did 8 to 10 scratch tracks sessions. So I'm getting to know these people that are producing this film. And it was the same team that had done the first Shrek. In fact, there was a guy, Shrek 2 made so much money for some people that one of the producers on Shrek 2 basically retired from the business on what he made off of Shrek 2. That's how much money that movie made. Anyway, so they're having me come in and do these scratch sessions. So at one of them, they said, hey, we'd like to toss you a couple of one-liners. And I said, I would love that, you know, to be in this movie, because everything that I was recording for Eddie Murphy was going to be re-recorded by Eddie Murphy. But this was like, oh my gosh, they're going to put me in this movie. So the first line that I had in the movie was a piece of furniture in one of the song that the fairy godmother is singing. And the line is, for a happy ever after, give Fiona a call. And I was a piece of furniture. Then later in the movie, there's a scene where Shrek is being locked in, trapped in this room, and he's trying to get out. And another piece of furniture blocks his way, and I did a little bit of a De Niro thing there where I go, "You want to dance, pretty boy?" So those were my two lines in Shrek 2. For a happy ever after, give Fiona a call. And "You want to dance, pretty boy?" So when you watch Shrek 2, those are the two lines that I had in the movie. The amazing thing about that was that here's how the math works. When you work on a film and you wind up in the movie, the residuals are based on the calculation of your residuals, of what you're going to get in residuals, are based on your day rate and how many days you worked. So on Shrek 2, I probably worked about 10 days, and my day rate was probably double scale, which is maybe, I don't know, at the time, maybe around $1,500 for like 4 hours, which is really good. But the thing of it is that DVD was at the time was the high. First of all, the film was at one point was the biggest grossing animated film ever. It's since been eclipsed by others, but at the time when it came out, it was the highest grossing animated film. So then the DVD comes out, and the DVD did gangbusters. And I would get these ridiculous, and I don't mean ridiculous bad. I've gotten residual checks for like 2 cents before. I mean ridiculous good residual checks for Shrek 2. And all these years later, I still get decent Shrek 2 residuals. Now, what happened after that, it kicks open another door. So the same company, DreamWorks, is working on this animated TV series called Father of the Pride. And unfortunately, it was doomed from the start because of some very, very bad timing. So Father of the Pride is based on the Vegas act of, who is it? You know what? Now I've got to go look this up. Let me take a break. I'll come right back. I'll tell you the Father of the Pride story when we return. It was Siegfried and Roy. It's Mark Moseley Show podcast. Welcome back. Today, taking a little bit of a break from talking politics, although some traces of politics may occur. Siegfried and Roy, and what happened was they're making this show, Father of the Pride, and it was an animated series based on the lions. So what they do is they took the lions from the Siegfried and Roy show and they anthropomorphize them. I think I said it right. It's, when you take something that's not human and you make it human. So they made the lions walk and talk like humans. And Siegfried and Roy are also not literally in it, but they're represented by voice actors. So the characters of Siegfried and Roy are in the series as well. Well, unfortunately, there was a near tragedy where one of the lions, about this time, attacked Roy Horn, and he almost died. You might remember that story. It was in all the papers. So it kind of doomed this show right out of the gate. And what was terrible about that for me is I got connected with the show. Originally, they brought me in, again, to do scratch tracks for Eddie Murphy for an episode that Donkey from Shrek was doing as a crossover to really make Father of the Pride something, right? So they had Eddie Murphy as a guest voice on the show. So again, they couldn't get him for the day they wanted. They brought me in. I did the scratch tracks. He came back later and re-recorded. While I'm there, they say, hey, there's a character in this episode who is Donkey's stunt double. Would you like to show us something that you could do to make Donkey's stunt double? Now, here's a little political. I'm going to get a little politically incorrect now. Now, remember, this was 2005, 2006, somewhere in there. And you could still get away with doing a stereotypical gay voice. So I had this character from the radio in Miami, and the character was Dion LaFleur. And Dion LaFleur was an entertainment reporter and a movie reviewer that we had on the morning show in Miami. And he was one of many politically incorrect characters that I did back in the day, back in the 90s when you could get away with it. I mean, it was radio. There were no cameras in the studio. No one knew that I was doing a character that was a young black guy. No one knew that I was doing this character that was gay. It was just entertainment. Anyway, I did this character named Dion LaFleur on the radio. So what happened was I did this character for Father of the Pride as Donkey's stunt double. And so he looks just like Donkey, but he doesn't sound anything like Donkey. He sounds like this. And so they thought that was hilarious. So I got that gig. Well, then the next thing you know, they keep bringing me back for all the episodes, and I'm doing multiple voices within each episode, what they call utility voice. I was the utility voice guy. And what the utility voice guy is a guy that you bring in. He's not doing a main character. He's doing all the little one-line characters. And I've done this several times. I did an episode of Fairly Odd Parents. I did an episode of My Life as a Teenage Robot, where I was one of the utility voice people. They bring you in, and they give you like 5 different characters scattered throughout the episode, and you have to, perform 1 or 2 lines. Well, that's what I was doing for Father of the Pride. And they had a premiere party for Father of the Pride, and that was kind of cool because I was there, and I met Jeffrey Katzenberg, who is the CEO of DreamWorks Entertainment. He was at the party, and I remember when I met him and I introduced myself. I said, "Hi, Mr. Katzenberg, my name's Mark Moseley." And he said to me, and I'll forget this, he goes, "Oh, I know who you are." I was like, "Oh, okay, that's kind of cool." So that was a cool night. But then subsequently, the series got canceled after, I think they ran 8 episodes of it. And it was doomed from the start because of the controversial nature of this show coming on the heels of this near tragedy. I mean, imagine if Roy Horn, God forbid, had died. They wouldn't have been able to air it at all. They were lucky he survived. They got a little bit of their money back. After that, things were going well. Hang on, my dog is trying to join in on the podcast here. He's insisting on getting up on the couch that I'm sitting on right now. Even though there's not room for you, buddy. There's no room here. He's like, I'm just going to get in here anyway. Hang on. Let me move these couple of things off the couch and make room for you, since you insist. Aw, buddy, I just love you so much. You're such a good boy. He's my shadow. Oh, my goodness, this dog. He's 1 in a million. I'll tell you. Don't shop, adopt. This message has been brought to you by Marie Moseley, my wife, dog lover extraordinaire. She's taught me that the thing about dogs is, we say in our house that dogs give you a glimpse of the unconditional love of God, because they love you unconditionally, like God does. They accept you for who you are. Right, buddy? All right. So I was talking about how well things were going. I got a big thrill. I don't remember the year. I got a big thrill when I got cast in an animated series for Nickelodeon called Splatipus. And the reason that I was really thrilled about it was because there's a gentleman who's associated with Nickelodeon, having many, many hits for Nickelodeon, including Fairly Odd Parents, which he brought me in to do an episode of. But he had created this animated series called Splatipus, and it was about a platypus and some of his animal friends. And I had auditioned for the role of, can't remember the character's name, but he was an ancient tortoise. He was like a 110-year-old turtle. And something about auditions. One thing that you learn over time as you go along, and good tip for anybody breaking into animation or looking to break into animation voiceover acting. This also applies to commercial voiceover acting. Not so much video games. Video games, they kind of like for you to stick to the script. So I've done a lot of video games too, but I found that most of the time they want you to stick to what's written. In animation, you're encouraged to improvise. In radio commercials, you're also encouraged to improvise. They want you to wow them with something special. So I'm auditioning for this turtle for Splatipus, and there's a part in the audition sides, they call them sides. There's a part in the sides where the turtle has fallen asleep, and he's snoring and he's dreaming, and he wakes up startled. And it just said in the script, wakes up startled. So, and Butch Hartman told me, he goes, this is the ad lib that got you the gig. So when I turn in my audition, I'm the turtle, and he's snoring, and he wakes up suddenly. So this is what I did.
Reese Witherspoon!
And he said that made us laugh out loud, and we decided you were the right person for this job because of that little ad lib. That the tortoise was dreaming about the actress Reese Witherspoon, and not in a good way. And so, what was just like Father of the Pride, though, the project did not make it. So I just did the pilot, and I was so sure because it was a Butch Hartman production, and the man makes hits for Nickelodeon, and the studio passed on it. So it was just a pilot. And in fact, I did a total of three different years. I did a total of 3 pilots for a Mulan animated series, and Disney passed on them every single time for whatever reason. And as you know, they've converted quite a few of their properties, their animated films, into animated series. Probably most famously Aladdin. I know they've done many sequels with Lion King. Several of their Tarzan. They did a Tarzan animated series. So they've done that a lot. Lilo and Stitch. There was a Lilo and Stitch animated series. But they wanted to do a Mulan animated series, which would have been fantastic because, you do those and it's like 99 episodes, So that establishes you pretty solidly. Because again, this is what happens. When you're brought in on a project, you come in and you're doing your main character. So I would have been playing Mushu the Dragon in the Mulan animated series. But off to the side, in this episode, Mark, can you play this guy at the market? And he just has one line, and the line is, "These lemons are fresh." Can you just say that line for us? And what that does, though, that breaks you out of the box that you're in. See, I was in this Eddie Murphy box, which was a beautiful, beautiful box, and it was serving me very well. But I was aching to break out of that box. That's why I loved Father of the Pride. That's why I loved Splatipus. That's why I loved doing Agamemnon in Mr. Peabody and Sherman, because anything that you can do to break out of the mold, because Hollywood, they have a tendency to go, when we need that, we'll call you, but otherwise stay away. They're not able to see possibilities sometimes. But you meet people that are like, yeah, kid, you're my cup of tea. I'm going to use you for everything. And I loved that. I had a lady at Warner Brothers. Her name was Corinne Cesarego. She has since retired. But she used to bring me in to do all kinds of looping for different actors. So I would do looping for... I did looping for a movie for George Clooney called Welcome to Collinwood. I did looping for Robert De Niro on a movie. So looping, again, is the airline usage. But I used to do a lot of looping. Well, about this time, I had established myself. This would have been the latter half of the second Bush term, going into Obama. I was firmly established, and somewhere in there, 2007, I actually got another really cool gig. Wound up not working out as well as I'd hoped it would, but it was still a fun job to do. When they made the Simpsons movie in 2007, Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, is the president in the movie, in the Simpsons movie. So it's President Schwarzenegger. And in the animated series, The Simpsons, Harry Shearer does a character that is a spoof of Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he's not really he's kind of doing an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression, but it's this guy, it's the Arnold impression that is, he sounds like this. So it's a very kind of cartoony Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well, when they made the Simpsons movie, the producers decided that they wanted to get Arnold Schwarzenegger to play himself in the movie. Unfortunately, he was the governor of the state of California at the time. He was the governor of the state of California and all of this. Yes, this is what he says. And so they said, well, let's see if we can find a realistic sounding, not cartoony, realistic sounding sound double for Schwarzenegger. So I audition and I get the gig. So I'm thrilled because I'm like, I'm going to be in the Simpsons movie. And so I go in, I record the dialogue. I think Schwarzenegger's in 3 scenes in the movie. And I remember one of the lines is, I was elected to lead, not to read. And what happened was, when Harry Shearer found out, and look, I don't hold this against him. It's a pride thing. It's a matter of personal pride. He'd been doing this character on The Simpsons for decades before they decided to do the movie. They couldn't get Schwarzenegger. If they had gotten Schwarzenegger, I think Harry Shearer would have said, okay, it's Schwarzenegger. I will defer to him. But because it was a sound-alike, I think that was what made him go, you know what, guys? I don't think this is cool. You should use my impression of Schwarzenegger in the movie. So they did. However, they actually used my recording in the overseas English version. So if you see the Simpsons movie in the UK, it's my Arnold Schwarzenegger impression, not Harry Shearer's. So I got that going for me. Which is nice. And then I also did another job subbing for Schwarzenegger. I did Terminator 3: The Redemption video game, which is not a great game, by the way. Not because of my performance, just the gameplay is not that great. So I really don't recommend it. Don't waste your time. But it was a great experience. Again, they were looking for a solid Schwarzenegger impression. And of course, my Schwarzenegger is grounded in reality, It's not cartoony. It's more realistic, So that, and this is the thing about impressions. When I do an impression, I study the impression and I keep working on the impression. A lot of people, the kids out there that they do these impressions, they cannot maintain the impression. They can't keep talking in the voice. They can do a couple of lines and that's it. And I work on an impression until I get it to where it's completely conversational. So you could put any script in front of me and I can do it. You could put, tell you what, let me take a break. I'll come back. I'll show you what I mean. Be right back. Mark Moseley Show. Welcome back to Mark Moseley Show. I took a break there because I wanted to go look something up because I wanted to, quite frankly, I wanted to show off a little bit because I pride myself in really working on impressions and getting them really well. I want to be able to do the impression well. I want it to be as good as it can be. I want it to be the best version of that person that's out there. And that's, quite frankly, that's how you get the work, And so here's what we're going to do. I will open the Bible to Mark chapter 7. And I'm just going to read as Trump for a while. The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And they observed many other traditions, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders, instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" He replied, "Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions." Anyway, you get the point. I like to work on an impression until it's to a point where whatever you give me to say is not going to be a problem. And so, that practice, that discipline, is what got me stuff like, the Schwarzenegger video game. Which, by the way, if you do play that game, here's something that's really fascinating about it. So Schwarzenegger had recorded the voice tracks for the Terminator 3 video game. So, but what's interesting about it is that Schwarzenegger, they used some of his lines from the first game, and they put them next to my lines. And so my impression had to be spot on because I was right there next to Schwarzenegger in some parts of the game. So that was really interesting. Here's where it gets political. Because I was doing very well and racking up some good credits, I got invited by a friend of mine who's an actor to a secret organization. It was secret at the time, called FOA, or Friends of Abe. Now, this is where it gets really political, because, my friends, blacklisting is real. Except now you get blacklisted, not for being a communist, for being a Republican. And I've had this happen to friends of mine. I had a friend, he won't mind me telling, I won't use his last name, but his name is Jeff. He's a friend of mine. And he's a writer, a very successful writer. And he was at the time writing for a cable show when, someone told someone in the office that Jeff is a Republican. Jeff gets cornered by 3 or 4 of his coworkers who are now yelling at him, berating him, calling him all kinds of names. My friend Jeff is Jewish, by the way, so it's just assumed that he's a liberal, right? Because a lot of people, a lot of American Jews tend to lean left, or at least sort of center left. I think that's changing now, but this was a couple of decades ago. And then he got called into the office later that day, and they're like, "I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go." Because of his politics, he lost his job. So an organization appeared in, I can't tell you when exactly it started, because for a while it was very small. It was a handful of friends, famous celebrities who were Republicans, and they wanted to be able to get together and talk politics like everybody else, right? But they had to do it in secret. And so it was founded by Gary Sinise, most famous for Lieutenant Dan, you got legs.
I know, Forrest.
Magic legs. Gary Sinise, most famous probably for Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump. Very successful actor. Hell of a guy. A devoted fundraiser for Wounded Warriors, all kinds of veterans organizations. He does concerts. He's got incredible. He takes the children of men who have died in battle, takes them to Disney World. Does that every year. They take a bus and he's a great guy. He started the organization. It was him and his good friend Patricia Heaton, who is probably best known for being the wife on Everybody Loves Raymond. They were kind of the nucleus of it, and along with people like John Voight. Well, anyway, they would meet in coffee shops and things like that, and they would sit and discuss politics. And they decided to make this organization, expand it out, to welcome people in and give them a place where they could not only just get together and talk politics, but also network, meet new people, make connections, maybe get some work, things like that. So my friend got me into Friends of Abe, and I would go to the lunches, and the lunches were really cool because you could have a 20-minute conversation with John Voight about George Washington. You would see people there that you'd go, oh, I didn't know he was not a liberal. People like, I don't want to out anybody, but I think Rob Lowe is pretty well known that he is at least a moderate or a libertarian. That's the dodge in Hollywood. You say, well, I'm a libertarian. We all know that's code for Republican, but you can kind of get away with it in Hollywood. So I got involved in Friends of Abe, and and then once a year they'd have a big gathering, and you'd see everybody. And I saw Dennis Hopper before he passed. I saw Kelsey Grammer there. I saw just all these people, and you go, oh wow, James Caan. All these people, and you go, oh wow, I did not know they were Republicans. And then what was really fascinating about Friends of Abe, it's growing and it's growing and it's growing. And then all of a sudden, during the Obama administration, as you know, now I didn't say anything, so not my fault if people at some IRS field offices decided to paw through the tax returns of some charitable organizations like Friends of Abe. Not my fault. I didn't tell anybody to do that. No, you didn't have to. You hired people that had your same worldview, and they just went and did their thing. Well, Friends of Abe, two things happened to Friends of Abe. First, they did get, the IRS was like, we need to see all of your stuff, and we're going to give you guys a hard time, and they gave them a hard time. And then the other thing that happened to Friends of Abe, which was probably bound to happen eventually, was it got infiltrated by people that were pretending that they had a right-leaning mindset, but they were really there to just be spies and to out people. And so they had to contract the organization back on itself. And so it kind of went back to being a very, very tight, small nucleus of people. But those were interesting times, both career-wise and politically. Some of the other things that I've done more recently, I will tell you, I did some work for the Emoji Movie, which was not a big hit, but it was fun work because I got to do some work, some sound like work for not Patrick Warburton, excuse me, the other Patrick Stewart. Sir Patrick Stewart. And of course, as you know, in the Emoji Movie, Patrick Stewart played Poop. So I got to do some sound-alike work for Patrick Stewart for the Emoji Movie. I also did an episode of The Connors, which was fun because I got to be on set for that. I did a voiceover, but they did the voiceover live at the taping of the episode. So that was kind of cool. I also did I did an episode recently of the short-lived HBO series Perry Mason. One of the things that I do well, and I get hired for a lot, is announcers. So I get hired a lot for sports announcers. I did a couple of Nike commercials over the years where I was like a sports announcer in the commercial. And the other thing I get hired for are like old school announcers, like old-timey announcers. So in, the 1940 announcer, they were actors in those days, but they would come in and do the newsreels. War breaks out in Europe. The Nazis are on the move. That kind of a thing. And I've done a lot of those over the years, so that was what I did for Perry Mason. In recent years, and here's where it gets political again. In recent years, the Eddie Murphy stuff has gone away. And I mean, I guess I always knew that political correctness would catch up to us, and we see political correctness everywhere in the world, and sure enough, it has touched my life. I stopped getting calls to do ADR and looping for Eddie Murphy movies. Not because Eddie Murphy cares, because I don't think he does. At the end of the day, I'm not seen, I'm only heard. So it really doesn't matter what I look like. But I stopped getting phone calls. And I think it became widely known that, like, oh, well, the guy that does sound alike for Eddie Murphy is a white guy. And how do we feel about that, guys? How do we feel about that in an increasingly overly sensitive town called Hollywood, California? So yeah, DEI. And the irony, of course, is that DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm diverse, but I'm not included. And I happen to know that Disney is working on some new project involving Mushu. I can't say what it is. I don't know. But that was a disappointing day because I get sides for Mushu for a project. And again, you just get like one page. You don't get the whole context. You don't know what the project is. You don't know if it's a movie or a TV series or what. They literally just give you a couple of pages. So I get this audition, and not to sound like a prima donna, but I'd done this for 20 plus years. I call my agent up and I say, hey, I'm auditioning for Mushu. And he said to me, well, it's a formality. And I said, but it's Disney. They know they've used me for over 20 years. I said, is this? And I remember I said to him, is this DEI? And he's like, no. And my agent's a great guy, really, really great guy. Fantastic, Steven. And, but I think he kind of knew, because he used to work in casting at Disney. So he knew both sides of it. And that was it. And I said, oh, okay. And I did not get the gig. And I think, like, as I say earlier, I think it was destiny that eventually political correctness was going to push me out of this job. So I've come to grips with it because it's been a few years now since I've done Eddie Murphy. I still get hired to do other things, and that's great. And I will tell you that my life focus has shifted since God got hold of me a few years back and literally booped me in the heart. I was walking and I had an incident where my heart went crazy and my heart rate spiked up to 208 beats per minute and wouldn't come back down, and had to go to the hospital, and they reset my heart. They literally restarted it, as they do. And it was at that point that I realized that I needed to make some changes in my life. And God got a hold of me and pulled me out of the mud and cleaned me up and got me to stop drinking alcohol, which I had developed a problem with, and haven't had a drink in 4.5 years. And the amazing thing, what God did with alcohol with me, was he took the desire away like that. I mean, people struggle with this. I never attended an AA meeting. I just stopped. And I give all credit to the Lord for that, because he just took the desire away. It was incredible. But since God got hold of me and got me cleaned up and got me thinking about, I need to be living my life in a way that is of service to him and of service to my fellow man. Now I focus my free time and my not so free time on helping others, helping folks, young people, to mentoring them, to bringing them along, to teaching them some of the pitfalls that they're going to encounter in show business, and to warn them about some of the dangers. And I'm very involved in theater as well, and still doing radio, and obviously still doing this podcast. So I have a great love for this, for politics, and for continuing on with this medium that is kind of like radio, a little bit like radio. So that is my story, and I'm in a place right now where I'm pretty happy with things. And if I never did another job in Hollywood again, I'd be okay with it, because, as you can hear, I had some fun. I had some good times, and my story definitely has an arc, and there definitely was a peak. There definitely was a high, but my story matches that of so many people out there. I mean, you think about actors that, they had an apex, and now they're not working as much as they used to, but they had their arc, and they have some fond memories that they can look back on. And so I've enjoyed it all. It's been a great ride, and as you can tell, I have some great stories to tell. Coming up later this week, I will be back with a political podcast with a little bit of comedy mixed into it. So give me a few days and I'll get that out to you. Thanks for listening.